really rich forum, and there's lots of fascinating ideas flowing through there. So again, my name is Marianne, and I'm helping to chair this really fascinating symposium. My mind is spinning from this morning's sessions. And I do not have a piece of pink paper like Claire, although I promised her I would because I have a 4-year-old daughter, so I don't know where the pink paper is, but I have a piece of yellow paper. So I'll be holding this up at the 13-minute mark for the speakers, okay? Cassandra, I'll hold this up at the 18-minute mark for you. Okay. Okay. So without further ado, so Claire, are you going to advance Cassandra's slides?
Yes. Oh, thanks, Claire. I'll just say next slide, if that's okay. I'm terribly sorry about this. But anyway, I want to thank everyone for accepting my paper, actually, for today. And my name's Cassandra Losa, and I'm from the University of South Australia. The title of my paper today is Towards an Embodied Ethical Practice in Sociological Inquiry as a Means of Performing Research. So this is very heavy theory. If anyone wants to run away now, go, run. But anyway, the term towards is utilised in the title because it signifies that this is a story of a journey into the development of an embodied ethical practice in sociological inquiry as it applies to previous research that I've conducted. I anticipate that people have read my abstract, so I'm going to launch straight into the content of my presentation. All right. So almost 3 decades ago, in 1991, Arthur Frank called for an ethical impulse in sociology that works to demystify the modernist tendency to analyse bodies and identities as fixed and knowable. This ethics, as Frank describes it, would be an ethics that, quote, would take the body as its fundamental point of departure. The fundamental embodiment of social action would ground all sociology. Only bodies suffer. When I first read this article, I realised that Frank was not only stating the sociological need for a new mode of thinking and writing about bodies, he was calling for an ethical approach that could listen to and hear those bodies told with and through the body that lives and also suffers, and I say that in inverted commas, a body that is sensuous and sensory. Outside of the wider analytical framework that Frank sets in this article, his suggestion that sociological practitioners must be a witness to the living, suffering body raised questions about my own bodily contingencies. These questions emerged upon reading literatures about gendered, masculine, and hearing disabled bodies as part of the research I was undertaking at the time. My research was to explore the ways that young men with moderate to profound hearing disabilities constructed their masculine subjectivities in different sites of the Australian everyday social. During my engagement with these literatures, I found that my embodied experiences of the world seemed to always exceed and befuddle the purity and solidarity of the seemingly inviolably distinct corporeal identities these sociological identifiers spoke of and about, but never quite to. The reading of these literatures allowed me to identify that being gendered and hearing disabled was too distant from the immediacy of the embodied suffering that I had experienced. It could not bespeak the conditions of embodiment I had experienced from living the first 3 decades of my life with a younger brother with a severe hearing disability in both ears. May I identify before I go on that the participants I'm talking about are not deaf. They do not identify as deaf either. They identify as hearing impaired, and they use spoken English as their everyday form of communication. So there's a PowerPoint, and I've skipped too many, and it's, sorry, Claire, It is Cassie, why are you focusing on? No, yep, yes. Okay, thank you. It was not until the moment I was asked about the motivations for undertaking my research by a colleague that my corporeal sense of contingency and suffering came to the fore. It was a simple question. Cassie, why are you focusing on the construction of masculinities by young women with hearing disabilities? I took this question as a personal address that called for more than an abstract response devoid of my own embodied biography. I burst into a flood of tears. This emotional outbreak both shocked and embarrassed me because it was totally unanticipated. The question had tapped an emotional bank of memories and family secrets that I had dared not access or let others privy to for what seemed like a very long time. It was a question that raised a more complex question. Claire, thank you. How are the bodily contingencies and possible sufferings of my young hearing disabled brother also possibilities for my own contingent embodiment? Addressing this question marked a moment that required a deep reflection on my experiences of growing up with my younger brother with a hearing disability and the ways these experiences stimulated my desire to attempt to perform and transform that history at the level of research writing. The act of remembering my past had created my present identification as one incorporated by a forward trajectory into the traditionally silenced and what I believe the often misinterpreted ways that young men with hearing disabilities live the everyday. My research was the projection of a desire to live what Dick Hebdige said, something more and something better than those writings that could not acknowledge the voices that bespeak the conditions of hearing disabled masculine embodiment as is lived in the Australian everyday. I'm so sorry, this is so left of centre what I'm writing about and speaking about. This story would have little importance if it was not for the ways that my relationship with my brother Sam has conditioned how I understand embodied subjectivity as a process of lived approximation to another. Far from being transparent and static, my knowledge and knowing is wrapped in opaqueness and steeped in the constant flux of interconnectedness and exchange. The question of how Sam's corporeal contingencies are possibilities for my own embodiment as they arose from this moment meant that the knowing subject could not be understood as one who knows by virtue of their ability to remove their subjectivity in order to write objectively. I was compelled to the task of locating the embodied subject in the territory of an ethical framework that could, in writing about the other, allow bodies to listen to and for write about themselves. PowerPoint. It was not until I later read the text by Cultural Imperialism by Edward Said that I realised the lived experience of the research enterprise is the centre of the research intellectual and emotional life. While Said writes in the context of colonised people and the suppression of their voices and histories, his statement that, quote, stories are the method people use to assert their own identity and the existence of their own history has import to the situatedness of my own embodied biography in the context of my research. Said's text illustrates, amongst other things, the trajectory through the methodological practices scholars utilize are always tied to their own embodied biographies. And he writes, and I love this, many of the most interesting writers bear their past with them as scars of humiliating wounds, as instigation for different practices, as potentially revised visions of the past tending towards a new future, as urgently reinterpretable and reemployable experiences. promoting the, quote, human community and actual context that contribute to its formation, of which we are all part, is a significant facet of the research writing enterprise. Sides contention invite elaboration of my own stories concerning my memories of my relationship with my brother Sam. Sam is 22 years old, identifies as heterosexual, and has a severe hearing disability in both ears. He wears a hearing aid in both ears and has a mild speech impairment. Sorry, I wasn't sure if anyone wanted to listen to this paper when I was speaking this. Anyway, the next section, I focus on how my own body biography of growing up with Sam connects with and influences the methodological orientation for performing research. Vignette 1. Sam is 2 years younger than me. Sam and I were born and raised in the aspiring middle-class northeastern suburbs of Adelaide, South Australia. I remember being 7 years old and Mum coming home from the audiologist in tears. Sam, at the age of 5, was trying to comfort her. Mum had been told that Sam would be profoundly deaf by the time he was 30 years old. The audiologist said there was no medical or technological solution, inverted commas, for Sam's hearing disability. The audiologist had also pointed out that Sam's hearing disability may have been caused by the medication that Mum had taken during her pregnancy. Sorry, I've been flicking through. Claire, are you up to PowerPoint 7? It would be by now. Next one, thank you, love. Yes. To this day, Mum believes that Sam's hearing disability and the problems he has encountered socialising and accessing employment are entirely her own doing. She has always said, if only I didn't take those tablets, he would never have been like this. From these experiences, I learned at a very early age that the practice of medical pathologisation, as it was applied to the bodies and behaviours of Sam and Mum, had the potential to discredit and violate. Claims of corporal pathology could cause suffering. These are the beginnings of my immersion in the worlds of disability. Within it, one can hear the power of a discrediting medical pathology in which certain bodies, behaviours and subjects are clinically identified as disturbing or challenging. The voices of Mum and Sam are largely excluded from the clinical encounter. Medicine ran out as the strongest and most legitimate. In speaking within and through the authority of medicine, Mum is convinced by the audiologist that Sam's hearing is defective and that it is this defect which is detrimental both to his coming to know the world and his interactive participation in it. Mum learned that hearing disability is a private space that is of detriment to Sam's movement and comprehension of the public space of hearing and speaking. It is in the context of medical knowledge, Sam's hearing disability as a present problem with unknown effects into his social future neither belongs nor counts in the community of the hearing world. His subjective being and knowings of the world were, along with that of Mum, dismissed as pathological. The first vignette brings several things to mind. It gestures, for example, towards the material lived consequences of being named and positioned as pathological in comparison to an able-bodied norm. The consequences are lived because they are embodied, intersubjective, and intersect across through time and space. For clearly, the practice of naming Sam as disabled in the medical encounter instigated in Mum a series of emotional responses of fear, horror, dread, and guilt, directed on behalf of her perceived, in quotes, irresponsible behaviour and Sam's projected future as a pathological entity. Attention is paid to the ways that feelings and emotions are complexes composed through interdependent and contingent embodied existence that invite subjects to recognize their ethical obligations and expectations. Attention is also drawn to the ways that my own interpretation of Mum's story invoked my review of the bodies of my mother and my brother. It incited a self-reflexive process where I reflected on the familiar bodies of Mum and Sam as that which could be rendered strange and different. I also considered how the medical encounter itself could operate as a practice of subjective constitution structured along the lines of membership, inclusion, and exclusion. Claire, could you go to the next vignette, please? Vignette 2. Sam wrote me a letter after I discussed with him the choice of topic I would focus on for my research. He said that he hated it when people treated him differently because they found out, and you can see all the quotation marks here, he had a hearing impairment, and that I'm using his terminology with regard to hearing impairment. He found it irritating and embarrassing when people refused to interact with him when they discovered, quote, he had a hearing disability. Of significant interest, however, was the way my attention was drawn to his statement that he didn't see Mum's crying as, quote, necessary because I didn't see my deafness as a problem, end quote. Can you flick to the next one, please? Thank you, Claire. Yet in the same paragraph and with the change in topic I did not anticipate, he wrote, as you get older, into your later teenage years, you realise how much you miss out on because speech becomes more complex. I would like to be able to meet girls with a hearing impairment, so then we are both not perfect. The juxtaposition of these statements puzzled me, and I later asked Sam what he meant by them. Sam said that having a hearing disability seemed more of a problem for other people than for himself. And this is where I'm seeing the interlinking from the other papers presented so far. He said that he was happy with a close circle of friends that he had, describing these people as true friends who accepted him for who he was. While Sam mentioned that he had some difficulties gaining employment, his priority was not paid work in the trade industry like Dad had told him, but to lead what he described as a good and what makes a happy life. And I just thought of Connie straight away with this one. A good life, he said, was surfing whenever you wanted to, playing in a band and having a nice girlfriend who likes surfing and music too. Can you flick again, please? And again, it's my fault. Yep. The complexity of language, however, was complicating Sam's ability to meet a potential girlfriend, and this was what was upsetting him at that moment. He said that hearing girls did not know how to interact with a person with a hearing disability, so he would like to meet a girl who was also hearing impaired. The imperfection of hearing disability, he said, would make a girl less judgmental of others. It would also make her more aware of the strategies Sam employed to engage in conversation that would consequently lessen his own frustrations and feelings of exclusion. And I finish here with this last two paragraphs. The above vignette signifies an ethical obligation to allow, in the context of this research, young men with hearing disabilities, or from a broader level, research participants to speak for themselves in the research setting. Talking with Sam about his letter was an occasion for me to engage with and comprehend the crucial significance of his voice as criterion for perspectives that posit absolute and fixed essences of masculine and hearing disabled embodied existence. Sam is actively resisting the identity foisted on him, by others who relate to stereotypical views of disability as corporeal incompetence, passivity, and personal tragedy. This act of resistance is extended by his partial refusal to pursue the gendered expectations that Dad places upon him regarding paid work. While Sam was working in the industry that Dad had recommended to him, he says that his job was not what he conceptualized as contributing to a good life. Quote. Instead, Sam cultivated a critical attitude to his present life to suggest another way of living that defied the gendered and disabled expectations imposed on his subjective being. Sam's subjectivity is thus regulated and individualized, but it is this regulation that motivates him to stylize creatively an alternative, pleasurable lifestyle that through embodied practices and relationships with others, he agrees with. He establishes a clear connection between presence and praxis, what is happening in his life now, and how this life can be reshaped to experience the good life that he ought to have. In speaking within and through an alternative ethics of pleasurable and happy existence, Sam shifted my attention away from ideas of personal tragedy or pathology. My conversation with him brought me to consideration of the open-ended nature of biographical and interpretive work, the interpretive open-endedness that forced me to reflect on the ways that my own provisional and positioned values, attitudes, and perceptions might influence the research process. This is my last paragraph. The point I'm developing here is that without engaging with my brother Sam, without speaking to him and asking for his own interpretation of his experiences, it would have been impossible to capture what it was I was trying to hear and see. I could not have anticipated the complexities and contradictions, the excesses and slippages, the power and resistance, and the pleasure, pain, and suffering that entered into and engaged the story of the construction of hearing disabled masculine embodied subjectivity as it was according to Sam. For the lived actuality storied in Vignette 2 reveals Sam's intention to perform and live a pleasurable form of hearing disabled masculine existence. Speaking with him reinforced my understanding that a reflexive and dialectical research practice offers a rich context in which conflicts in the interpretation of meaning can be revealed and renegotiated. A reflexive and dialogical practice simultaneously and importantly acknowledges the positioning of both the researcher and the participants in the production and interpretation of stories. It is a practice that comprehends stories as told with and through bodies as partial, positioned, and provisional. That's the end.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. That was a very beautiful presentation. And I'm sorry that we don't have a lot of time for questions now. I invite people to share your insights and comments in the chat. And there were so many commonalities with some of the earlier presentations, but it really speaks to the profound relationships that we form with the kinds of things that we research and how we orient to them. And I was also really struck by something that we haven't talked about yet today, but is not only care, but a sort of a profound sense of love that really flowed through that presentation. And that was really lovely. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on quickly here, and I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Justine Topham from Federation University, who is going to be presenting her paper entitled Relaxed Restriction, the Transformation of Diet Culture. Are you ready, Justine?
Yeah, I am. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my PowerPoint.
Great.
Alrighty. So hi everyone, I'm Justine, and today I'm going to be talking about the key findings of my honours thesis, which will also be what I'm hoping to expand on during my PhD. And so that's talking about the transformation of classic diet culture into wellness, or what I call relaxed restriction, as demonstrated specifically in What I Eat in a Day videos on YouTube. So I just want to start by providing a bit of context on some of the key factors shaping contemporary diet culture. So first off is the strong, not skinny. Over the past decade or so, the dominant beauty ideal has slowly but surely shifted from skinny, the wave-thin, heroin-chic look of the late 90s and early 2000s, to strong. This is generally commended as a positive break away from diet culture and oppressive, unattainable beauty standards for women. However, this athletic physique still presents a very narrow beauty ideal and comes with a unique set of pressures. Cairns and Johnson discuss the do diet, or the idea of dieting for health rather than appearance, a narrative which has become ubiquitous throughout popular discourse. This pushes a post-feminist framing of diet as an empowering practice for women. The do diet also encourages women to be conscientious but not fanatical about health, reminiscent of the French woman's cool and casual attitude to food, as discussed by Bourdieu. This means that influencers heavily downplay the great deal of effort which often goes into attaining the body type constructed as healthy and normal within the online wellness space. It is impossible to discuss the new diet discourse without also discussing the ever-increasingly mainstream wellness culture and the philosophy of holistic health. There is a rhetoric of being in tune with and listening to one's body, but in reality, we are told exactly what this is supposed to look like. However, in contrast with classic diet culture, this is conducted in a gently suggestive rather than prescriptive way. Diet is now a dirty word, replaced by the holistic terminology of lifestyle and mindset. But that does not mean that diet culture has disappeared in practice. Social media offers a rich site of analysis for this new diet discourse. It is fascinating to consider how social media allows the act of personal testimony to fulfill a public pedagogy which educates people on how to frame their bodies and health. We seem to feel unable to eat confidently without the guided assistance of these unofficial experts, with their anecdotal wisdom, perfect bodies, and aesthetic lives. Thus, instead of the internet liberating individuals from tradition and rigid notions of health, we seem to be simply trading one source of moral authority for another. While there has been a recent movement to correct social media's perceived toxic side, as a visual medium, it inherently cannot help but facilitate comparison culture and judging others based on their outward appearance and aesthetic. Finally, it is not just influencers, but the diet industry itself adapting to this shift in discourse. For example, Weight Watchers now goes by WW and emphasizes a more balanced approach of slow and sustainable weight loss. Weight loss is now not allowed to be the overt goal, rather the convenient byproduct of healthy practices. As Jovanovski observes, the diet industry has been forced to do this in order to stay relevant and socially acceptable. There is less yo-yo dieting and bizarre fad diets being pushed, but this then risks new diet culture going unquestioned as a common sense approach, when it still contains many problematic elements. So now I'm going to give you a brief summary of my process of data collection and analysis. My methodology was discourse analysis, particularly focusing on the disjunct between what influencers say and what they mean. I also considered what entrenched assumptions often go unchallenged. Put simply, I was searching for concealed diet culture discourse. I analysed 84 What I Eat in a Day YouTube videos selected from the start of January to the end of May 2021. My criteria was female influencers with over 100,000 subscribers. The reason I restricted my analysis to female influencers is because this is overwhelmingly what is recommended to me through the YouTube algorithm, suggesting that dieting continues to be a chiefly feminine coded practice. I attempted to include a range of ethnic backgrounds, such as Black and Asian American women, but predominantly white women continue to dominate the genre. And this is in line with wellness culture in its current commercialized manifestation being very white overall. So I grouped the data according to the narratives or messages that I most commonly observed appearing in my sample. I also identified surrounding themes such as neoliberalism and post-feminism. What became apparent to me very quickly is that there is a lot of repetition throughout these videos, almost as if reading off a script. They are telling us what we want to hear, what the new discourse dictates as the correct way to approach health. The relaxed restriction discourse preaches a balanced and realistic approach to health. This is often implemented through the 80-20 diet. Although it is rarely described as such, this allows for the budgeting of indulgence and compensation tactics seen in classic diet culture to continue undetected. This is part of reconciling the bulimic cultural consciousness, where women are expected to consume, but also self-discipline. Eating out is a considerable source of cultural capital or social status, and thus we can't simply not participate in it, but we must limit it to sensible amounts. Chelsea Trevor, who follows the 80-20 diet, claims, "I don't follow any restrictions or limitations with my diet." She describes eating 80% healthy foods and 20% things I want to eat and things that I enjoy. This is interesting because it illustrates an avoidance of explicitly deeming foods as good and bad. It is more common to hear them referring to nutrient dense versus less nutritionally dense. This is less overtly moralized, but it is still very telling that the foods she enjoys are restricted to only 20% of her diet. Thus, restriction is still heavily present. There is only a conditional quasi-food freedom, where there is a rule even for rule breaking. You can eat whatever you want, but only within reason, as long as it doesn't result in visible bodily changes. As Chelsea Trevor states, "A couple of chips, a little thing of candy is not going to change my body." The idea of measured pleasures, as spoken about by Sederstrom and Spicer, is relevant here, where only a regulated, very mild form of indulgence is deemed permissible. One example of how balance can ironically become unbalanced is evident in a monologue by Jacqueline Forbes. Forbes states how the pressures of YouTube and wellness culture makes her almost want to only show perfectly home-cooked meals that are super well balanced. This shows that the choice of whole foods over convenience foods, every meal being nutritionally perfect, is not intuitive or natural, and is in fact quite arduous. This is a major problem with relaxed restriction, as it ends up becoming the perfect diet. Not too much, not too little, attaining exactly the right amount of all nutrients. There is a palpable sense that not being seen as restrictive is a pressing concern for modern influencers, as public approval depends on the mindset they project about food. Indeed, Molly May predicts that there will be negative comments on her video, accusing her of not eating enough. In another example, Naina Florence emphasizes, "I want you to know that I binge out on chocolate all the time." Here, the act of eating chocolate almost becomes tokenistic and performative in order to achieve a disassociation from diet culture and disordered eating. I wanted to use this slide to briefly mention the body positivity movement. In theory, the body positivity movement means that all bodies are celebrated equally. However, there have been criticisms that this movement has been corrupted, in that it only allows women to possess curves if they are in exactly the right places and only in exactly the right proportions. This also leads to the argument that beauty standards continue to be entangled with the patriarchy and the male gaze. As you can see with the women featured on this slide, selected from my data, they clearly attest to the overwhelming homogeneity of body types dominating this online wellness space. On this slide, you'll find a selection of common foods I observed throughout these videos. One thing you'll notice is that the fast food options are always either homemade, fakeaways, or the healthy option, for example, sushi, burrito bowls, poke bowls. I included the Built Bar because it featured in so many of the videos as a sponsorship. The emphasis was always on how it tastes just like a candy bar, but without the guilt. This is the whole point of relaxed restriction, where you don't feel deprived, but you're still making the better or healthified choice wherever possible. Even though no food is off limits in theory, there is still an avoidance of the real thing. We also see the plate method, where each meal is carefully designed to tick off every box of health, achieving a perfect balance of carbs, protein, and healthy fats. Katie McKenzie defines intuitive eating as, I only eat if my body is telling me that I'm hungry. In this sense, intuitive eating often seems to end up in eating less or self-denial. Abby Pollock remarks that in our current society, external cues will often overwhelm the internal, leading to a more complex relationship with food. This positions intuitive eating as an attempt to combat the perceived overabundance of food in modern society, promoting the self-discipline of leaving a bite of food on your plate rather than gluttonously cleaning up every bite. It presents a relationship with food that is free in theory, but highly controlled and tied up with neoliberal self-mastery. Also notable is the attempted performance of spontaneity, again the do diet, such as Maggie McDonald, who confesses at the start of her video, I don't really know what I'm going to make today. I'm just going to kind of wing it, I guess. And yet there is a high level of meal repetition and meal prep throughout these videos, suggesting a neoliberal dependence on routine, which seems to directly contradict the tenets of intuitive eating about eating whatever you want in the moment. The language around dieting has changed, but it is still dominated with foods that nutritional science and diet culture have constructed as healthy. This is then rationalized through concepts such as intuitive eating, which act as if healthy lifestyle choices are entirely individually motivated without any wider structural or cultural factors compelling the behavior. It is a convenient fact that intuitive eaters seem to naturally crave a perfectly balanced diet, and there is a need for greater transparency here. Volume eating can be situated within relaxed restriction as well, as it seeks to create the illusion of abundance. Typically, volume meals are bulked up through non-starchy vegetables and various low-calorie substitutes or swaps. Connor Kathleen offers the following explanation of volume eating. It's just about me finding a way to eat as much food as I can while hitting certain macro goals. This displays a desire to eat as much as possible while attaining aesthetic goals. It also promotes the idea that if dietary decisions are made from a scientifically backed fitness perspective, they cannot be disordered. And yet it often seems to become obsessive, for example, meticulously weighing food, and is incompatible with social spontaneous eating. I would like to finish by drawing attention to the numerous remnants of diet culture embedded in relaxed restriction. Above all, there is still a heavy emphasis on appearance and the body as a source of self-worth. For example, Molly May, in detailing her fitness journey, describes feeling so much better about myself and like a new person. Like diet culture, it still romanticizes and entrenches as the ideal, a lifestyle which is inaccessible to most. It is largely made possible by the self-employed influencer lifestyle, which enables them to dedicate an elaborate amount of effort to wellness, which the editing process conveniently obscures. This sets people up to fail in believing that they can easily attain this lifestyle. Wellness, like diet culture, is dominated by thin, white bodies. Thus, even though participation in wellness has become an increasingly mainstream obligation, it is ultimately deeply exclusionary and not a viable option for many. I would also like to acknowledge that these videos do come across as genuinely well-intentioned, but they can clearly have unforeseen detrimental effects in fostering feelings of inadequacy. This is because these YouTubers present themselves as everyday women, meaning that viewers are likely to engage in greater levels of social comparison with them. And yet these are not truly accurate representations of everyday women, despite their attempts to cultivate relatability and authenticity. Rather, they are idealized embodiments of health and wellness. It is important to consider how discourses rebrand themselves over time to become more culturally palatable while fundamentally remaining the same. Here I argue that ultimately relaxed restriction is not as successful as it likes to think at challenging the status quo when it comes to dieting and the way women view their bodies. So then I have my references divided up into theory and data if anyone wants to have a look at that later. And now, any questions?
Thank you so much, Justine. That was really, really wonderful, really insightful. And I had the pleasure of reading Justine's honors thesis, and it was very, very impressive. And you raised some really great insights that are so relevant to our discussion today. Do we have any hands? Yes, I see. Is that you, Claire? And Edith? Claire.
I was applauding, but I also do have
Oh, yes. I'm getting my hands mixed up, my different hands.
But I'm happy to jump in with a question because that was so brilliant. And I just have I have a million questions, but my question is really about this kind of like review culture that I've seen kind of coming up in a few of the papers. And I'm just fascinated by it. It was something that I think Ashley mentioned. And I think it's really it's like a thread through a lot of them is like, what do you think is the role of these like personal testimonials and it seems like intimacy is a really big part of those, but I wondered if you could speak to that, Justine, about the role of kind of the personal testimonial.
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking.
Justine, you think about that for a minute. I'm just going to respond quickly to Claire because Claire and I talk a lot about these sorts of things, but I similarly was wondering about the sort of confessional that was going on. And, the confessional has been key in a lot of analysis of women's magazines from, way back in the 90s and 2000s about this sort of confessional, and it sort of serves to maybe create a little bit of intimacy, like, oh, look what I'm doing. I'm going to draw you into my world. I'm human, I'm normal. But really, as Justine pointed out, these individuals are not actually, because they have access to a lot of things and they fall within certain categories and enjoy a lot of privileges. So I too was thinking about the confessional and the intimacy as well, Claire. So, sorry, Justine, I thought I would just give you some time to think because I thought Claire's question was really interesting. Should I move on to Edith's question?
Yeah, I think so.
Hi, that was so interesting. I think we have a lot of crossover in some of the things that we look into, which is great. And you can answer this question later because it's a bit more specific to something you've done in your thesis or that you're thinking about that I would really like to pick your brain on. And it's the finding people that have been recommended to you through the algorithm. And that's something that I've done in my thesis. And it's been hard to balance everyone that keeps coming up are white women in their 20s, but I'm also a white woman in my 20s, and the things that you're watching and get recommended to you and how you're like articulating how you're doing those things. I'd love to pick your brain about that later, or if you have any thoughts about it now, because it's something that I'm working through currently, and it's been a bit of a process because the algorithm boggles me every day.
Yeah, for sure, because you want to get a balance of like different, a bit of diversity in the sample size, but at the same time you want to reflect what's getting the most traction and who has the biggest following. So.
Naomi, we have a moment.
Yeah, so full disclosure, I supervised Justine's thesis, so I'm familiar with her data. And so what we saw a lot of in her data and what Justine picked up on was that there is this real kind of embodied confessional narrative around wellness, where it's like that creates that intimacy that you're suggesting, Claire, where Justine was saying to me, like, they talk about like not wanting to feel bloated and not wanting to feel heavy, and like these very kind of embodied cues that are kind of driving that sense of intimacy and that testimonial. It's like, oh, when I do this, my body doesn't feel bloated, so maybe this will work for you. So it's hiding it under this kind of like personal testimony and kind of embodied responses thing. So sorry for speaking for you, Justine, but you did talk about that in your data, and it was just such an interesting point.
Yeah, and it offers like an embodied, like a blanket disclaimer that any advice they give, if it goes wrong, it was just their point of their advice, their experience, and there's no sort of accountability, I guess.
And Edith, I can connect you to Justine and make a little introduction so you can talk about algorithms.
That's great. Thank you so much, everybody, for your fabulous questions. And thank you, Justine, for a super thoughtful and fascinating presentation. So I'm going to move right along to our next presenter. And we just had a question from her. Edith Hill from Flinders University is going to be talking about combating wellness misinformation on YouTube, the case study of Abby Sharp.
Hi, thank you so much. Give me 1 second. Oh. Sorry, I'm not sure why it's not. How embarrassing. This far into using Zoom and it's just not happening for me. Oh my goodness. Sorry, it's not letting me share.
Is it your settings at all?
Oh, I'm in them now and I'm trying to get it to work, but it doesn't look like it's doing it. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I got a new laptop last week and all my settings have changed.
Do you need a moment to sort out your settings and perhaps we could move on to the next
Is that
presenter?
okay?
Yeah, we just don't want you to feel under pressure right now because we've all been there.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, no idea what's happening. I'll have a
If
quick.
there's any issues, you can always email me the video and I can always put it on for you.
I might do that actually. Okay, I'm so sorry to the
Oh,
person
no.
asking me to rush you forwards.
That's okay, Tamia, are you ready to go? Would that be okay?
Yeah, I'm all good. That's
Yeah.
fine.
Okay, well, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Tamia. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, yes.
Tamia Class from the University of Adelaide will be speaking about diet culture dropout, wellness culture, anti-diet rhetoric, and body positivity on Instagram. Looks like it will fit in fabulously with what we've been talking about.
Yes, no, I think it will as well. So thank you for introducing my talk. Oh, hang on. There we go. So just to start everyone off, I'm at a really early stage of my data analysis and only 5 months into data collection and research. So what I'm presenting on today is more kind of early observations of the specific entanglement of wellness culture, diet rhetoric, and anti-diet culture in body positivity and fat liberation spaces on Instagram. So I'll start off with just a slight introduction and then give a bit more context of my research project, move on to specific observances of anti-diet culture and wellness on Instagram, and then talk about kind of 2 big ideas I'm using to help understand this, which is the good fatty trope and toxic positivity. So if you Google wellness culture, diet culture ? You get dozens and dozens of articles that kind of conflate the two and that explain how wellness culture is diet culture in disguise. So going into my research, I had kind of certain expectations of how this would present itself in my field. But what I found was really interesting because it's something that is often said but not shown. So a recent paper by Natalie Jovanovski and Tess Yeager aims to holistically understand what diet culture is. And they did this through a survey of 118 mostly female, mostly anti-diet advocates and health professionals on Instagram. I just wanted to put this up here because I don't have enough time to dive into exactly what diet culture is. So I just thought that this would give some good background for people that aren't 100% across that. It's one of the first academic papers to look at kind of the holistic meaning of what diet culture means across the board to many women, and how it's understood by people who employ the concept in their work online. They bring through themes such as racism, neoliberalism, capitalism, and patriarchy, as well as larger ranging discourses that are more relevant in my research, which is fat hatred and fear and the thin ideal. While doing some research as well around wellness and diet, I came across an earlier paper by Peter Conrad that really brings up 2 ideas that keep coming up again and again. And basically, he says that the paper suggests that wellness seekers engage in a profoundly moral discourse around health. Thus, even apart from any health outcomes, the pursuit of virtue and moral life is fundamentally an aspect of the pursuit of wellness. So those two ideas of morality and virtue keep coming up again and again. So for more context on my research project, I'm conducting a digital ethnographic study of body positivity and fat acceptance liberation collectivities on Instagram. I'm also doing content creation as part of my participant observation, which also plays into my autoethnographic practices. And I'm also conducting interviews with content creators and community members. So my research participants are body positive and fat liberation advocates. They're either active content creators in the space or those who are more involved with the communities but a bit out of the limelight. I'm also really interested in talking to people who self-identify as advocates or activists. And so looking at how they do this is when you go onto their profiles. A lot of the time they'll have how they identify in their profiles, such as my participant Casey. She identifies as self-love and body confidence. She does curvy fashion and fitness, ED recovery and mental health. Whereas my participant Kyle is identifies as fat and queer, an intuitive eater and future intuitive eating counselor. They're an anti-diet meme maker, and their kind of slogan is let go of diet culture, find yourself and find your passions. No one I study self-identifies as a wellness influencer. So anti-diet culture / wellness culture finds itself on Instagram at a really interesting juncture of a collection of social media movements or communities. It can be found in body positivity, fat positivity or fat liberation, mental health advocacy, body image coaching, and more generic or popular Insta feminism. My research is not specifically looking at how people understand diet culture. Although some of my participants and the larger creators that I observe do acknowledge in their bios or their content that they are anti-diet, I did not go looking for specifically for anti-diet advocates. There is a large intersection of fat acceptance advocates who bring into their content anti-diet rhetoric. However, it must be acknowledged that being anti-diet is not the same as being pro-fat liberation or anti-fat phobia. So I have this slide just to show that a lot of people think of diet culture and wellness quite far away from, well, traditionally they did, as quite far away from each other on the end of this spectrum. But I'm also look at it as this cyclical kind of construction where diet culture and wellness exist quite close to each other, and anti-diet culture is on the other side, but it is often borrowing approaches to talking about these, talking about anti-diet culture from diet culture. And I look at this that essentially many anti-diet creators are trying to dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. So diet culture by another name. Diet culture has been rebranded as wellness culture on Instagram and other social medias as more widely in the media as well. Wellness culture takes the neoliberal focus though of diet culture further than diet culture does. It's instead redirected into ideas of wellness, which can encompass all things lifestyle. So mental health, food behavior, body image, productivity, creativity, socialization, individual relaxation time, as well as things like healthy eating. Detox teas are still very evident in this space. And one of my favorite hashtags, which I find very entertaining, hashtag wellness queens. It's still built on the foundational ideas of women needing to continuously improve and flourish. So therefore, the pressure really is transferred from weight loss to holistic lifestyle wellness. And wellness culture also often transfers obsessive dieting or eating disordered eating behaviors into clean eating. Diet culture isn't just a matter of being on a diet, but of social forces that make dieting or lifestyle changes culturally mandatory. So one quote I found from Good Housekeeping, which I really liked, is that diet culture refers to a rigid set of expectations about valuing thinness and attractiveness over physical health and emotional well-being. Diet culture often emphasizes good versus bad foods, but there's also newer ways of conceptualizing that, focuses on calorie restriction and normalizes self-deprecating talk. And that's kind of where there is some borrowing from diet culture by anti-diet culture people on Instagram, is that self-deprecating talk is still really evident, and so you can see a lot of that borrowing. One of my primary informants, Kyle, who I mentioned before, is anti-diet and Haze aligned, and one of their central ways of talking about anti-diet is through memes. And more widely in my space, that's what I found as well, is that anti-diet culture here is most often shared through memes or informative, relatable parody reels, which are short 60-second videos. More broadly, this is kind of how anti-diet culture looks on Instagram. It's very kind of fluffy and pink, and also ruled by, you know, thinner white women as well. So intersections of anti-diet culture and wellness are most evident in areas of healthism, which Aubrey Gordon writes of as closely linked to both anti-fatness and ableism. Healthism posits that health is both a virtue and a moral imperative. And this really brings to the forefront the ideas of the good fatty, but it also needs to be stated that healthism is hugely ableist as well. This rebranding of diet culture as holistic and more concerned apparently with overall wellness is a trend that really is noticeable in these online discourses. And healthism further entangles the moralization of health and wellness, as well as the hierarchy of bodies and lifestyles. So the good fatty trope is really where wellness becomes substantially entangled with these ideas of anti-diet culture. The good fatty trope is the idea that it is fine to be fat as long as you are healthy, as long as you are active, as long as you have a good lifestyle. Here, wellness co-ops diet culture's expectations of fat people in the guise of acceptance. So this is a great quote from Gemma Gibson. She has done a lot of work into the good fatty trope, and she writes that she has recognized 3 main duties of the good fatty, which are good health, healthy eating, and the will and ability to exercise. If these duties are carried out, then fat people may be absolved of healthist narratives and made innocent of their fat bodies. If they are not, then I argue a person becomes a bad fatty who was deemed morally inferior. And on that note, I have quite a few research participants who identify as disabled, and even ones that don't. Some of them play into that idea of self-identifying as the bad fatty and as kind of the anti-wellness warriors, or that kind of idea. Then into kind of my last bit, I'm also working through the idea of using toxic positivity to understand where anti-diet culture borrows from diet culture and wellness rhetoric. So a lot of the time I talk about toxic positivity in body positivity as not a singular act, but a continued action. The idea of body image for a catch-all holistic self-improvement phase is used widely. So body positivity as a self-identifier has become hugely debated, and a lot of especially smaller white creators acknowledge this. So they move away from self-identifying as body positive and will instead use the idea of body, that they are centering their practices around body image. This picture shows one of my research participants, Hannah. She identifies as a mental health advocate, and also anti-diet. And in her interview talks about how she has played with using hashtags such as wellness or body positivity, but has veered away from it because of hate comments. Another space that you see a lot of conversation about is trolling in comments, and it's called concern trolling, where you'll have people in the comment section of, oh, I'm only concerned about your health, but I think you should lose weight, or I think you should live a more healthy lifestyle. So I just want to end my presentation with a quote from one of my participants. She says, "Why are there so many people, and I think especially girls growing up, thinking that they need to lose weight and that it's possible? Like for more than 5% of people who like go to try it." And I was mad about this. So thank you so much. I'm very happy to have presented today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tamia. That was fascinating, and it dovetailed so nicely from Justine's talk as well. And I have a question, but I'm going to go to Naomi. Naomi, you have a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you had seen like what your participants were talking about with regards to body neutrality and kind of like the wellness discourse, because I see a lot of creators saying it's not about feeling positive about my body. I don't want to feel any, like, I just want to feel neutral about my body. I want to like not have to think about it.
I've had one of my participants likened that to the All Lives Matter movement, because they're like, if we take the focus away from there being bodies at all, then we're not acknowledging that certain bodies are, are being further marginalized. And I found that a really interesting way. Body neutrality is actually, I didn't realize going into this, it's hugely debated. You have some people that are like, woo, yes, this is great. And you have a huge contingent of my research participants on both the body positive and the fat liberation sides who just see it as useless because they think that, and I don't know, I haven't worked through my thoughts on this, but they see it as, if you completely disconnect all of this from bodies, then what are they doing? I think one of my participants talked about how she likes it as a movement for people to start on the idea of fat liberation. So if body neutrality is where they need to begin that journey, then that's great. But she says if that's as far as they go, they're not going far enough.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions? I just had a comment about your methods, Tamia. They seem really, really cool and inventive. I guess I don't have a specific question, but I guess how are you finding them helping you to answer your sort of curiosities and questions around this? Has anything been surprising you or?
Yeah, so one of my methods that's kind of central to this is the content creation as participant observation. And I look at that as creating this reciprocal vulnerability between myself and my participants, because what they are sharing is often so personal and so vulnerable and also because I'm approaching my project from like a feminist perspective, I wanted to break down a lot of that hierarchy between participant and researcher. So I think creating content has been hugely influential in how I'm approaching my questions and working through those. Because I think so many studies that look at body positivity or fat acceptance on Instagram look at the content, and then they might sometimes interview the creators, but a lot of the time it's kind of, there's this, they, separate the two. But then also with the content creation, I'm able to ask my participants about, as surface level as it sounds, their process and also how they feel in their body while they're creating and posting that content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really important piece to add to these kind of analyses, definitely. Yes, and that idea of relationality and ideas of vulnerability in research, especially when we're sort of talking about some of these topics, is really, really important as well. Does anyone else
Oh,
have-
I was just going to say to the comments,
yes.
yeah, no, body neutrality actually often, I think people always get this, there's a big disconnect by what it's called and kind of actually what it is. So often it really is, at least by how my research participants have talked about body neutrality, is it's not being neutral to all bodies. It is about being neutral to your body, but it is almost that concept of not seeing bodies. That's actually what it is, because because fat liberation already fills that space of, you know, not creating biases against bodies. And so body neutrality, yeah, I think it definitely depends. People understand it differently, but from how my research participants have talked about it, it is kind of actually discarding noticing bodies at all. So, which was also a surprise for me, because that's not how I understood it going in either, but that is how they talk about it. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a great question in the comments. Does anyone else have any questions for Tamia before we move on? Well, thank you very much, Tamia. That was a beautifully well presented presentation. Excuse me.
Thank you very much.
So are we ready for Edith now?
Yes, I have Edith's presentation and I'm going to share it.
Okay.
Thank you, Claire. Sorry about the delay with that, by the way, everyone. No idea what's going on. It's just one of those days.
No, Zoom is very fussy and I don't trust it. It's suspicious.
I will blame the new computer, hopefully, or half the settings have come across and then half haven't, and it's been a time. But if I just say next slide, Claire, would that be okay when we go through? That
works for me. Is it showing up for everybody?
Yes, it looks great.
I will mute myself.
No. Thank you so much. Oh, if you're sharing when the video comes up, will you have to have it so the audio comes through? I'm not sure how that works.
I'm not sure. Let me know if it causes any problems that I'm muted, and I'll unmute myself.
Thank you. Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for your patience with me and my wonderful not able to screen share. My name's Edith and I'm a PhD candidate at Flinders University, and I'll be presenting my paper, Combating Wellness Misinformation on YouTube, the case of Abby Sharp. I'd like to begin with an acknowledgement to country. I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and I have benefited from living, working and learning on the stolen lands of both the Kaurna and Ngarrindjeri people, and I acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. So I'll give you a quick rundown of what I'll be talking about today, and it's next slide. Thank you, Claire. So I'll talk to you, of course, about Abby Sharp, about her and her channel. I'll be talking a bit about the community on YouTube and community building affordances on YouTube, and how Sharp specifically combats wellness misinformation. But first, I'll give you a bit of context for this research. So the information in this paper is drawn from one of the chapters in my thesis. Now, I come from a life narrative background, so while my thesis is fairly interdisciplinary, that is where most of my theory is grounded. So the sociology parts of it are relatively new to me, and I would absolutely love to get your thoughts and suggestions on things that might be helpful or that you would like to see included at the end of this presentation. So my thesis is titled Health and Wellness Narratives on YouTube, but there's a bit of Instagram and TikTok in there as well, because I couldn't help myself but include those. So there's a chapter on Belle Gibson, there's one about female bodybuilders doing transformation videos, and then there's this chapter about Abby Sharp. So next slide, please, Claire. So who is Abby? If you just press it again, that should kind of scroll through, hopefully. Beautiful. So Abby Sharp is a registered dietitian from Canada who makes YouTube videos based on her knowledge and expertise as a dietitian. She has well over 500,000 subscribers, and her videos usually get between 100 to 200,000 views, but she does have a few that are at that 1 to 2 million mark as well. Her channel boasts a range of content, but by far most popular videos are the ones where she reviews the What I Eat in a Day videos of other YouTubers, and Justine touched on What I Eat in a Day videos just before as well. These videos, like many on Sharp's channel, are part of the broader trends that we can see in online wellness content, including videos around diet, nutrition, physical and mental well-being, and how to be all around well. So for anyone who isn't familiar with the details of the What I Eat in a Day videos, it's usually in like a casual vlog style where, you follow the creator around for the day and they show you what they're consuming. And these videos often fall into multiple categories. They're often in like lifestyle content, but we of course see them in the weight loss, bodybuilding, and general health and wellness genres on YouTube as well. And then enter Abby Sharp. So she watches these videos and then she provides commentary on them and the dietary choices of the YouTubers. Her comments often include suggestions for additions to meals, and she occasionally makes comments on things like calories and at times discusses disordered eating practices. Now on the next slide, Claire, we've got this video that I hope is going to play successfully. Okay.
Now the perks of eating raw veg in the morning. Number one, you are completely detoxing your body. Number two, you don't have to worry about if you're eating too much because honestly, you can never get enough fruits and veggies in your diet. So here is my fruit and avocado breakfast plate.
Ooh, things have taken a turn. Where do I even start? Now, I love the colors in this breakfast and it's no doubt nutritious. It's definitely not super balanced. Avocados are great and fruit is also great, but these fruits are really high in fat and sugar respectively. Good fats and good sugars, yes, but I would really like to see some more protein or some higher fiber whole grains to help balance everything out. Now, I know she mentioned that she's raw until noon for some reason, but still, this would be my recommendation as a dietitian. Next, Natalia jumps into my favorite nutritional buzzword of all time, detox. I've said this time and time again, but apparently it's worth repeating. Foods do not detox your body. Your body detoxes your body.
So I think that's a pretty good quick intro into Abby Sharp and her kind of reaction videos. So they follow the very traditional reaction video format where, they're watching, they pause, they comment, they watch, pause, comment, and it goes on like that for the whole video. But Sharp kind of steps out of the classic wellness genre that we often see on social media as she provides peer-reviewed sources to support her statements. And this is something that I've very rarely seen elsewhere on the platform. She uses these sources not only to make recommendations for the diet of the YouTuber when she's saying, add more protein or have less salt, and here's a study that says why you should do that. But she also uses the sources to combat any health misinformation that the person may share. For example, if they've discussed a cleanse or detox like this person did here, Sharp will bring up a recent study and break down the claims that the product or program is making in an attempt to provide some more transparent information. And next slide, please, Claire. So YouTube, when it was created in 2005, was initially designed to be a place to store video, but very quickly it transformed into a space for amateur video production. So while things have developed quite a bit since 2005 on YouTube, and we see some very professional content being made now, the idea of the amateur production still remains. And YouTube positions itself as a place where anyone can make an account and anyone can make a video. And of course, we do need to consider issues of access, like to technology, to resources, to time and safe spaces to film. But for the most part, that's YouTube's tagline is, anyone can do this, anyone can make a video. And that being said, anyone can make a video about health and wellness, about any information that they would like to say. And so before the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 outbreak a pandemic in March 2020, YouTube's community guidelines did not include anything about health or wellness misinformation. You could post about anything. And in the early stages of my thesis in 2019, when I was looking for case studies, I came across so many videos of people talking about curing every disease possible with essential oils, getting rid of cancer by eating whole foods, and rejecting traditional cancer treatments. And all of this was completely allowed as far as the community guidelines were concerned. However, in March of 2020, YouTube added their first ever health-related policy. And this policy was about COVID specifically, but since then they've also added phrasings about warning against promoting dangerous cures or remedies. And I'm really curious to see how far they take these policies in terms of health and wellness information. I think this was a momentous moment for YouTube and for my thesis to be able to watch this unfold as it was happening. When a platform makes guidelines like this, it makes a massive impact on the kinds of narratives that we then see coming out of those platforms. And if you go to the next slide, Claire, this is what the policy looks like now. It started out as nothing, obviously, then it was a really small paragraph and it gradually increases. I know that text is way too small to read, but some of the dot points there are absolutely hilarious and very, very specific about the completely strange things that you can't say about COVID that I hadn't even heard of, but it's there in the policy. They've gotten very detailed with it. And the next slide, please, Claire. So how does YouTube itself facilitate community building? So since its creation in 2005, it has become a site for significant community building. The platform and its affordances specifically encourage community building and active participation. And by this, I mean that the platform is set up in a way that encourages users to be active and to interact with each other and with the creators. So to like, to comment, to share, to interact. They also recently added in the community tab for posts outside of videos. And I have a screenshot here from Abby Sharp's page that you can see. And so YouTube is constantly encouraging and developing new ways for users to interact and connect with each other. And now more than ever, creators are aware of the kinds of actions that are necessary to build their channels and their brands and to actively encourage audiences to engage in their comment sections. And this is, of course, true for the wellness community. So this screenshot is from Abby Sharp's page, and these are just the most recent two posts. The first one says, "Hey lovers, for those of you who use or would use protein powder, which do you prefer?" There are 20,000 votes on that poll. And the one underneath says, new video dropping at X time. What are some common food additives and ingredients that you see commonly demonized or called out as toxic, inflammatory, or carcinogenic? Let me know and I'll debunk them for you. So it's really clear that she is pulling in her audience to interact and to engage in this very specific wellness and health conversation. And the next slide, please, Claire. So health professionals like Sharp have the potential to impact and to alter the health life narratives that others share on YouTube. In a small study that discusses the role of influencer marketing and social influencers on public health, E. Bryan, J. Kearney, and C. Machiavelli consider the role that social media influencers have in the transmission of health information online. They explore how many influencers online advocate for fad diets that eliminate whole food categories, including dairy-free, gluten-free, vegan, etc. And their study found that 16% of participants reported online influencers having a high influence on their food choices, with 32% saying that influencers motivated them to make healthier food choices. Audiences may perceive the influencers they follow to be promoting healthy diet and lifestyle choices despite their lack of qualifications to do so. The authors state, registered dietitians and qualified nutritionists are the best source of credible, accurate nutrition information. Thus, it is pertinent that they share their scientific-based information to the public. Now, Sharp, of course, falls into both of these categories. She is both an online influencer and a registered dietitian, and as such, her role online and her ability to impact an audience really cannot be understated. Sharp's reaction video format creates this really interesting collaborative space where the original creator is taken out of the context of their video, where they've edited themselves, created themselves in a very specific way, and then they're put into this space with Sharp where they're critiqued through her professional lens. And I argue that Sharp's health professional status and her reach of 500,000 people provides a legitimacy to her critique and consequently alters how that original narrative is perceived. And the next slide, please, Claire. So how does she specifically impact the health and wellness community outside of these videos as well, or outside of the reviewing of the videos? So Sharp includes disclaimers in her videos, stating her position as a dietitian and the role, this video is entertainment purposes only, etc., etc. And since the rise in popularity of her channel over the last few years, Sharp has noted that many wellness influencers are now also using disclaimers in their videos. And this is something that Sharp herself has partially attributed to her own impact on the community and to other dietitians like herself, that she thinks that they are the reason that other people are starting to include these disclaimers. These disclaimers usually outline how the creator is, not a health professional. This is not specific advice. Consult a professional if you would like specific advice, all of that. And this was kind of unheard of up until a few years ago as well. Thank you. And there have been multiple cases as well where people who Abby Sharp has reviewed have commented under her videos about them and made corrections to statements she's made, or responded or have criticism of her. I've included some more polite responses here, but there have been some really interesting back and forths between her and other creators. The first one I have is from the woman we saw in that video I showed, from Natalia Taylor. And she says, "I love this, so insightful. I subscribed and took notes as well," which is quite nice. The one under it is from a man named Derek Simnett, who is a nutritionist. And he says, "Thanks for the feature, Abby. I appreciate the honest and thoughtful review of my eating. Just a quick note, in many of my videos, I do mention I supplement with vitamin D3 and B12, and that most people should consider supplementing with these, complemented by regular blood testing. I'll make an effort to mention it more as it's very important." So in her review of Derek, she was critical of some of his dietary choices and not including that he was supplementing. So he's come in and said, I'll be more careful to mention that in the future. So I think it's pretty clear that she has an impact in this space and that she's actively participating in this community, both through her own creation of videos about herself and her diet, and through reviewing of others, while also striving to make a positive change in terms of transparency of credentials and the transmission of information. So to wrap up, the wellness community on YouTube is something that has interested me for years as someone who consumed it when they were younger, and now to researching it myself. And I'm only really scratching the surface of everything that it has to offer, but it's been a huge privilege to complete my PhD while it's all happening. I am that excited as well. And I think that's about it from me. If you go to the next slide, Claire, I've included my email and Twitter here. I'd love to engage with you all after this as well. Like I said, sociology is not my field, and I'd be really keen to get your thoughts and opinions on all of this too. Thank you so much, and for your time and your patience with my technical difficulties in the beginning.
Thank you so much, Edith. That was fabulous. Really, really great insights and lots of things to think about there. It's a really fascinating case. Now, I know that Leanne had a question, so maybe we'll start with Leanne, and anyone else that would like to ask a question, please raise your hand or put it in the comments.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, here I am too. Hello. I thought that was a fabulous presentation. Thank you very much. And one of the questions I have is I was thinking about what you were saying about, YouTube introducing sort of, policy around the distribution of health information and that kind of thing. And I note that the person of your case study are they Canadian? Did you say at the start?
Yes.
Okay. So in Australia, we have this organisation called AHPRA. I don't know if you're sort of familiar or anyone's familiar with AHPRA. And they actively prevent, or they don't prevent, but they make it very difficult for registered health practitioners to actually share a lot of health information. And I was just wondering if in thinking about, sort of the various topics that you raised, whether you had also thought about the fact that it's not actually everyone who can share the information at will. In fact, the health practitioners who desperately want to have to jump through various hoops just to be able to not get banned. They can have their registration taken away from them. Now, it doesn't apply to nutritionists, but it would apply, for example, to a gastroenterologist.
Yeah, that's a really, really great point. Because Abby is the only health professional in the thesis, this is like the health professional chapter. That's something I hadn't really considered, but I'll definitely make a note of, because I would love to talk about how that's different across different countries. It's really interesting when you think about digital spaces and laws that are in place in different locations and how that impacts the information you get as a whole. It reminds me of when you have like sponsorships and deals about ads and stuff, it's not just the laws in your place, it's the law in the place where the majority of your viewership is. So if you are Australian, but the majority of your viewership is American, the laws that bound you around sponsorships and disclosing ads and products apply to you as well. So it's really interesting that different people in different places, they're all conforming to so many different rules and laws. But that is such a good point, and I'll definitely make a note of that. Because she's Canadian, it hasn't come up, but it would be a really good thing to include in the introduction of that chapter. So I'll make a note. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Do we have any other questions for Edith?
I had a quick one. When did the community tab come in? Because I feel like it was a couple of years ago, but I'm a bit fuzzy on that.
Yeah, it was, oh God, I'm going to forget the year. I think it was like 2-ish years ago. It was recent at the beginning of my PhD, which now I'm talking about it, 2019 was not, was not 2 years ago. Everything's kind of blurring together, but I can double check and let you know in the chat. In terms of YouTube, it's new, but yeah.
Quick follow-up, like, do you have a sense of why they introduced it? Were they worried about like declining interaction or something like that? Like, what was pushing that?
I think it was something around that, and that other platforms have so many different ways to integrate things. It was another thing for YouTube to be like, we have a new thing as well. It's like Instagram being like, we have Reels, don't go to TikTok, everything's fine. I think it's something like that where they're trying to be like, we have the community, there's more stuff here, we're competing. I took it as that way, but I'm sure there are some articles out there that I could find that would give a more specific answer.
It's just curiosity. That was a wonderful answer. Thank you.
I think it's less successful than they were probably hoping it would be. At least for the people I followed, not as many people use it as I think they assumed would be using it actively anyway.
Thank you so much, Edith. That was fabulous. I'm going to move along to our final presenter for the day, and super excited to have Julia Coffey presenting from the University of Newcastle to wrap up this fabulous forum. And she is going to present her presentation titled Having It All, Wellness Culture, Instagram Bodies, and Perfect Lives.
Thank you. And thank you so much for a wonderful day to all the presenters and to the organisers. It's been fascinating listening, and yeah, so many connections between the papers. And I also want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from unceded Darkinjung country on the Central Coast of New South Wales today. So the presentation situates the role and significance of wellness as an idealised image, mode of being and subjecthood connected to a perfect life in neoliberal Western context, which is made particularly visible through Instagram and other social media platforms, as so many of the wonderful presentations have already spoken about. So I want to talk about how wellness is really attached to particular bodily styles of presentation and appearance. And this was described in the research that I've done through the Instagram influencer in particular being, the exemplar of this idea of an aspirational perfect life. So I draw on feminist new materialist understandings of the body as socially and materially co-produced to theorize the body as assembled through the socio-material conditions of everyday life. And yeah, I extend some of the analysis I've done before to really think about how wellness is itself an important contemporary mode through which the body is lived and felt. So I want to talk about how the gendered bodily appearances in particular, which are coded as representing or aligned with an ideal life and a perfect body, also aligned to comportments of wellness and are essential for understanding the ways in which aesthetic capital and bodily value is attributed in Western neoliberal contexts. So the analysis also aims to contribute to a feminist analysis of the affective and socio-material dynamics through which bodies and images become through each other. And also I rather ambitiously want to situate the effective pull of wellness against the backdrop of late capitalism and impending climate collapse. So I'm going to do what I promised in the abstract, which is, doesn't always happen. So this body of work ties to, it extends from sociology of health and well-being, which I've looked at in previous work, and how the currency of well-being discourses serve to individualise challenges as personal well-being problems. And the neoliberal logic embedded in positive psychology approaches, which are embedded in our day-to-day kind of popular culture, aimed at correcting a flawed subject's lack of inadequate medical training, can create a new dimension of stigmatization for those who are sort of positioned as lacking in self-sufficiency and not having enough capacity to think positively, as Illouz says. So not only is lack of self-worth not viewed as an effective social structure, as of course a sociologist would see it, but it's viewed as self-inflicted. So it's also in fact ultimately viewed as the cause of one's poor economic performance, which is a whole other dimension, an extension of that neoliberal logic. So by a spectacular inversion of so familiar to deeply ideological forms of thinking, the effect of social inequality becomes the cause for it. So as other people have already spoken about so well today, well-being and resilience become moral characteristics required of neoliberal subjects. And the ideal but fundamentally necessary qualities of healthy, economically functional citizens, as Ehrenreich has also said. I also will connect this kind of context to Lauren Ballant's concept of cruel optimism in the findings. So well-being discourses also connect to image-based ideals and the neoliberal invocation to look good, feel good. An ideal subjecthood is conferred on those to resemble an image of well-being and health through particular physical and appearance traits. So it's seen as being something that can be read onto others' bodies, which of course the YouTube and TikTok examples we've seen, really display that as well, I think. So in other work, I've looked at how bodywork practices is a way of looking at the embodiment and production of gender against the backdrop of this really significant positioning of the aesthetic body as being a really important aspect of social life and cultural life. And practice is geared towards shaping the body and physical control, such as wellness regimes involving diet, fitness, and bodily presentation through consumption, are increasingly central to the production of gendered subjectivities in gendered neoliberal times, as Ros Gill has spoken about. So the focus on bodywork practices in this context also connects to McRobbie's discussion of the perfect and the heightened demands of bodily capacity in the present moment. And the perfect, she argues, is a leitmotif for contemporary femininity, in which having a perfect life achieved through individualistic striving and competition is presented as the baseline for female success. So the body becomes a key horizon of value to be controlled and cultivated, and bodywork practices can then be understood as the means by which neoliberal health and gender ideals are mobilised and lived. So I am using feminist new materialist accounts and understandings of the body as socially and materially co-produced and as assembled through the conditions of everyday life. And I use this to, in this presentation, develop an understanding of wellness as an important contemporary mode through which the body is felt and lived. And these perspectives direct attention to the ways in which material things act on and with us to produce human practices. And the small humans in my life have just returned home from school, so if you can hear them, let's hope they don't burst in here. So yeah, these perspectives are useful for trying to account more fully for the complex processes by which social realities come to be and could be otherwise, and also to really take seriously the felt and experiential dimensions of health and well-being, which, as we've seen through the other presentations, are so important to include in research, because these things are often left out in health research in particular, and that's how people are drawn into a whole range of things that we heard about, like conspirituality. So thinking about all these connections. So the study, I used Photovoice and in-depth interviews. So these are images really just from one participant, or maybe one or two that I will talk about today. So I used images and Photovoice as a way of exploring the social and felt embodied dimensions of well-being and how it sort of emerges through the context of people's everyday lives, and sort of can include everything. So I asked participants to take photos of their lives leading up to the interview, just in the 3 days or so beforehand. I just asked them to take a photo of any time that they were just going about their day and noticed that they were feeling something that they could, you know, relate as being connected to well-being or wellness, because I wanted to try to frame it really broadly and not constrain it from the outset. I also was trying to get beyond representations of health and well-being, which obviously I still have lots of those, like, you know, the coffees and, you know, there's vegan meals in there and Instagram influencers and things, but I was also trying to get beyond a representation of an image of health or wellness to try to depict a sort of a felt version of that. So as Rebecca Coleman has said, images of transformation are pervasive, appealing and powerful because they are effective and they engage the body through an intensity of feeling. So that's what I'm trying to really invite into my analysis through the theoretical framework. So their photo images depict the ephemera of daily life, which inform well-being or sense of self, which they registered as a feeling in the moment, as one participant called it. She said, I took a photo when I had a feeling in the moment. And I was like, that's exactly what I was hoping for. Didn't always go that way, but it certainly, you know, has the potential to be useful for that kind of research. So they took photos of trees, water, landscapes, bedrooms, bands in live music venues, friends, socializing, drinking cocktails, eating pizza, fishing, cars, gym equipment, tarot cards, candles, mandalas, animals, cats, dogs, horses, friends, their own bodies, as before and after workouts. Healthy food like vegan bowls, and of them exercising with friends or alone in front of the mirror. So well-being, I'm saying here, is formed through the small stuff of life rather than a narrowly or singular defined representative image. So the next examples, which I hope I have time to go through properly, I think I'm going okay. I briefly want to talk about I guess, the broader context of how most of the women in the study talked about social media bodies. It was something that they brought up in the interviews quite a lot. Mostly they were described, social media was described by them as being quite an exclusionary or regulative social space where they felt uncomfortable or felt like they required a lot of kind of resilience or management to be able to operate in. So Monica says, you know, you need to just focus on yourself. You're different people. You're never going to look like that. You're never going to be her. You don't look like her. So you don't have the choice to post photos like that person does. I guess this comment really talks about how difficult, you know, the paradox or impossibility of confidence culture or toxic positivity, as others have spoken about. And Monica also says, you know, that's not, Monica also says, oh no, is it Laura, sorry, that people are constantly putting up photos of themselves in the gym or in their home, the smoothie they've made or their lunch. I feel like, because I'm not thin, I can't do that, that it's only for, she talks about how it's really only for people who are thin and fit and living that lifestyle that it makes sense or isn't intelligible for someone to post a photo of a smoothie. So I was quite, you know, I was surprised kind of by the intensity of the kind of felt sense of regulation and impossibility of being able to participate in online spaces because of this kind of thin ideal of body image. And, you know, they acknowledge that other body images, body shapes and things do exist here, but they, you know, she also said later on in the interview, I don't think I'd be able to do that. I don't think I'd be able to post a photo of myself and my body as it is and be able to feel good about it. And this is really in contrast to then this next participant, Penny, who I'll spend more time with here. So she really described the images of beautiful women on Instagram and the Fitspo influencers she followed as inspirational. She felt that they were inspiring her and helping her to live a better life, which I'll talk about in a moment. So she reveres these fitspiration influencers And she thinks that, or she presents them as exemplars of average people who work hard and have it all. And they embodied her avowed goal to just be healthy and happy. So she says, a lot of the people I follow, she's scrolling through her phone here, like this person, she's fit. And I'll just show you the photo. She's actually DJ Tiglily, who one of the other presenters spoke about, which is a nice kind of parallel. Mainly the girls I follow are just normal, like size 10, size 12. None of them are extremely skinny. None of them are big and muscly, just average kind of people. So she's presenting this person, this body, as an average type of body. So she's saying she promotes a holistic style of health. I follow a lot of people on Instagram that portray that sort of thing. And she sort of presents them as being like an aspirational and attainable kind of life. So she's saying if you work hard, you can attain this. If you're fit and healthy physically, you might be happier. You might feel more love or more clarity and all that sort of stuff. So there's such an effective pull to these images and the ideal life they promote as within reach for Penny. And fitness models on Instagram who visibly embody ideals of health are also read as having an increased capacity for health or clarity, or even being able to love more. I don't know whether she means receive more love or love more purely, but it's a really striking example, I think. And also particularly, I'm also struck by this is presented as an average body, which I think we could all, highly regulative and very narrow concept of average there, of course. So I should say all these images are used with permission from DJ Tiglily. I needed to get her permission for them to be published in the book. So Penny's talking about it a bit more here, saying on their Instagram, they've got it all. She's talking about DJ Tiglily and others. They've got these inspirational quotes, and they've got photos of them in bikinis and photos of them with their partner. They've got photos with their baby. It's just like, oh my God, they've got it all. Look at that. And she's talking about how this person's sort of been able to achieve some kind of status as being like a superior being in having, more love or more capacity perhaps. So, basically we can see the perfect operating here. We can see how important I think the effective pull of these images is. And she describes that looking at these things is aspirational, keeps her feeling aligned with her goals. I don't really have time to go through this example, but it's basically, this obviously wasn't the only thing participants said about wellness culture. Others said that they found it really annoying and draining, and that it was just a really difficult thing for them to navigate because they felt completely bombarded with it in their daily lives through their parents or through the people they work with. Also some veganism discussed in here, which connects to some of the earlier papers about eating and the far right. But I want to conclude because I really want to, make some last connections here. So these examples connect with how Warfield, Canberra and Abden describe the body as becoming through social media, flesh, self, culture, modalities. And Penny's example in particular highlights the affectivities of these dimensions combined. And her consuming of wellness culture bodies on Instagram is felt as an effective rush. Wow, look at that. And this embodied sense helps to produce her orientation to self, where these luminous ideal bodies promoting ideal lives or having it all serve as inspiration and exemplars. So I want to just connect this as well to Lauren Ballant's work and her discussion of cruel optimism. So she argues that, or they argue that one dimension of the cruelty of life under late capitalism is that we get attached to a cluster of promises regarding the good life that are generated by and embedded in conditions that are already not working. So this emotion is cruel optimism, and she notes that it introduces into our intimate and public lives a state of crisis ordinariness. So I feel this crisis ordinariness. I feel it now as I did 2 years ago in the interview with Penny, as I register the appeal yet cruelty of the aspirational good life depicted in these images of pristine environmental and aesthetic bodily beauty against this stubborn kernel of climate anxiety as I first registered it in the black summer of 2020, and as the ash and burned leaves rained down on my skin and onto the skin of my children. And it's impossible for me to reconcile these feelings, yet they live in many of us as we're distracted by the multitude of events and obligations in the everyday. So the final words can come from Lauren Ballant, who urges us to build from the place where we're not entirely crushed. And Donna Haraway, who urges us to figure out how we can open possibilities for what can still be. We need more than critique. We need to build new ways of being and living in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. What a wonderful way to end. And I really love that connection you made at the end there. You got there beautifully. And what a great addition to some of the analyses and thoughts that have been shared today. Yeah, and really, really rich data as well. That must have kept you busy for a long time, all that data, because it's lovely data.
Thank you. I should just say it's from chapter 5 of my book, but I kind of developed it further. So if anyone's interested, there's some further, like it's properly analysed in there. Yep.
Well, it's wonderful. It was very insightful. Does anyone have any questions for Julia at this moment? I just got to turn off my timer before it goes off. Julia, we do have another minute. Is there anything else? Because I felt like you sort of rushed through some of the really interesting thoughts you were developing there at the end. Did you want to add anything about, you talked about the bushfires and the sort of the starting to make these connections to, the sort of more than human world, the environment, the climate. Did you have any thoughts that you wanted to share there, just because we do have a moment?
Yeah, I mean, I was just really feeling the kind of incongruence of this, facade of well-being and wellness. And it is important that it's felt, and I value that it's important to people, and that it, is an important thing for them to engage with, as Penny was talking about. But at the same time, I just feel like it's so disingenuous the way that it is promoted and idealized more broadly, like culturally and societally, that we have these, pristine bodies, as someone else talked about it, as, I think it was in Anna Hallohoff's presentation about, how people don't want to be, don't want to become impure through having the vaccine. And there's just so much sort of, incongruence, I think, between this ideal of pristineness and pristine bodies that wellness kind of promotes, and then I'm just feel like there's a constant cloud behind me of like destruction and pain, and it's like we can't quite imagine it, but yet somehow we have to face it. And I feel like everything's entangled at the moment for me. I'm trying to look at it more broadly. But I feel like feminist new materialist theories, where we're trying to look for possibilities with critique and to try to imagine the not yet, are really important in moving forward as well, and gives me a lot of energy. And reading Ballant's work and Haraway and others always inspires me. So that's kind of where I got to, and I'm hoping to keep going.
That's a nice uplifting note to sort of go with, because yes, it's always great to return to these writers that offer us some hope without glossing over what's really going on, which is really quite devastating and scary, as you said. And someone mentioned it in the morning, and it's something that I think about a lot, is how and COVID is a really good example of one of the results of when humans encroach on the environment and the planet in ways that hurt the planet. And it's not that big of a jump to understand that, but knowing what to do about it and how to go about fixing it is so complicated, and it's so hard. And it's sort of much easier to say, okay, well, I'm going to become a vegan and feel like you're doing something. So there's sort of this, it's something that I've thought about a lot, instead of, how do we sort of create an impetus to turn people's attentions to sort of activism and looking at these things. And there's something Claire and I talk about with it. There's sort of something that feels good about engaging in these wellness conspiracies or misinformation sort of flows and practices. There's something that sort of feels good about it. So I think that's maybe all of our challenges as we go forward.
Yeah.
Naomi, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something you said sort of earlier in the presentation, Julia, where you were talking about how some people feel that they can't claim certain bodily practices, where you're like, I can't post a photo of myself working out because that doesn't make sense. And I know that that's something that Claire, Marion, and I have been talking about with regards to like athletic activities, like feeling that you can't claim certain spaces or labels, and that you're always like on the edge of them looking in, even though you're engaging in those practices. So I was really interested in maybe hearing a little bit more about that from you.
Yeah, yeah, I was struck by that as well, as I said. Just feeling like it was mentioned, I think, in the first quote by Monica as being like, she brought up those things as a way of telling me how she manages, or she tries to separate herself from body concerns and try to have a positive relationship with Instagram or with social media, how she's able to be in that space. And the way for her was to be, that's okay. I'm not trying to aspire to be that person, or I'm not actually trying to change my body to look like her. But at the same time, in the next breath, then she said, that's why I don't post photos. So it was still, I was just throughout the whole project and the book and all the pieces I've written from it, I was just the impossibility, or just that real, the impossible kind of expectation that you should somehow be able to, recover or claim some space outside of culture to celebrate, a body as being wonderful, however it is. It's such an awful thing to ask people to do, or it's such a pernicious part of the gendered paradoxical discourses at the moment, that there are so many rules and so many ways that you're expected to perform your identity as liberated or empowered, but so sort of at the same time so felt as repressive. But I don't see things in those binaries, but it's just such a tension. And I try to really think through the conditions of possibility then for gender in those contexts, because it is so constrained at the moment still. It really is, but it doesn't have to be. So that's kind of where I always just end a paragraph. I'm like, well, let's keep looking, keep trying.
Yeah, I just find that so interesting as well. So I'm so glad it's in your data and in your work.
Yeah, I tried in the book, Everyday Embodiment, I really tried to make the whole thing about like, how can we understand and take seriously how, the problem of body concerns for women, not as an essentialized thing, but why is it that all the men in the study are like, I don't have to care about it, I can if I want, but I don't have to. It made me think about the body neutrality thing as well. It's like the privilege that having a particular subject position or a particular comportment allows you to have, and the power relations that exist. So then in that setting, where are the moments of rupture, and what is possible, and the most any participants were really able to achieve was sort of some distance from it, rather than it just being a constant. So not neutrality, but just some kind of distance from it, where they could have a bit more room to breathe.
Yeah, interesting.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I think I will end that discussion there, and just want to say thank you to all of our presenters. So a big hand to everyone. Yay, that was great. Thank you so much for participating in this, this idea that really Naomi and Claire have been working on for a while, and then came to me, and we had some really productive and fruitful conversations. And I've sort of tried to cobble together some notes for some very kind of loose concluding comments, and then we do have a notification or announcement about a potential edited book. So at the end of the day, my thoughts are not going to be that eloquently put together, but it's always interesting to think sort of what themes are sort of shared across the papers, and where there are points of departure. And I think what it might mean for a future of a sociology of wellness. You know, wellness as a term is so salient, and it comes across, and it's so just so proliferating so rapidly. So the various wellness trends and concepts and practices today are vast. Trends of wellness that encompass any number of practices. And we talked about how they have very, very important histories that they cannot be disentangled from, but often in popular discourse and practice, they are taken out of and separated from these concepts. And that's when we get these things like, you know, nostalgia for the natural body, nostalgia for the way that we eat. And these wellness trends and practices and discourses that we've talked about today are deeply entangled with historical and powerful forces of patriarchy, misogyny, and white supremacism that serve the needs and expands the conditions of possibility of some bodies, but not others. They are always inexorably tangled up in power relations. So today we have seen the various ways that wellness acts to normalize and discipline. But bodies also respond in various ways to these forces. And it is these respondings that can be potentially moments of creative and ethical resistance and disruption. So too can embodied and relational practices of care, love, sharing, and connection be experienced and performed as resistant. So perhaps going forward with the sociology of wellness, we can continue to develop and expand and hone our ability to tune into these respondings through theoretical and methodological approaches that can attend to these materialities. That was one sort of thought I had. The other thing that really struck me was, and it's sort of what Julia was talking about at the end that I picked up on, but someone said in the chat or in one of the discussions that neoliberalism is the ultimate con. So many of these wellness practices and trends are picking up, are co-opting positive terms. And it's so easy just to go with them because they feel good and they sound right, but really they are masking or eclipsing something I guess a lot more sinister. And I think a lot of the analyses today have sort of uncovered that. But what I really like about today is that there was also a sort of a balanced tone of hope and sort of an affirmative sensibility. And again, Julia helped us end on that. I might hand it over to, I had some other notes, but I might hand it over to my amazing co-host to see if they have anything else to add.
Well, I think the way I would like to add is just with a lot of thanks for all of particularly for my wonderful co-organizers, Marianne and Naomi. We've heard a lot of wonderful feminist theories, and I want to chime in by saying we have a wonderful team of feminist organizers who have been our little academic witch coven, as I often like to refer to us. And I think that has been a real highlight of organizing this event, has been working with the two of them. So that's my main contribution, is that academic work should feel like this all the time. And thank you to all of you for your amazing attendance throughout the day. You all have been so attending that you're all still here largely, which is incredible, especially on Zoom, which is truly a weird medium to stick around with all day. So I just wanted to add my enormous love for all of you for sticking with us throughout the day, and your incredible contributions, your amazing papers. You've made me think, every single paper has made me think about something that I hadn't thought of before. And we just have so many amazing ideas, which also brings me to the other point that I was meant to make that I forgot about, which is that we have an idea for an edited book, which I think we mentioned in the break, but I was away eating pasta. So we are hoping to turn this kind of witch coven into a actual academic output, which is the idea of kind of a sociology of wellness edited collection, which would use lots of the ideas that we've kind of been developing here. So we're kind of gonna turn our thinking into something kind of concrete in a couple of weeks and be in touch with you all. But we would love to hear your thoughts and feedback, and anything you think of, you know, don't be a stranger, send us an email. But it's just been an absolute delight to see the ideas that you have come out with. And it's been such a pleasure hearing about the creative things that you've come up with from our truly kind of quite open pitch. So you've all been incredible. It's been so wonderful. Thank you.
we will leave it there, and we will be in touch with further plans about books and possible publication outfits. But yes, thank you all again for your attention.